On the Talkback Show, on the radio, or whatever audiovisual device you choose to use. Welcome to the GBC Podcast, where we talk about the Packers and our hometown of Green Bay. This is episode 36, created on January 4th, 2023. I'm John. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin. Along with me, Jeff in Minnesota, and Neil out on the East Coast. Say hello, gentlemen, and tell us what you're drinking.
Hello, everyone. I am having a Double Nickel Brewing Company Jetro Hazy IPA.
All right. Good evening, gentlemen. I'm having a Founders Highball Drifter.
All right. And I joined the beer crowd tonight. This is a Back Pocket Brewing Gold Coin Blonde Lager. And I really should, for brevity, call it my friend Dak's beer that he left at my house after the game. All right. You can find us on YouTube and Twitter at GreenBayChat and Facebook at the GBC Podcast, GreenBayChat. And now just the audio is available on Spotify and Anchor by searching for us with GreenBayChat. Hey, what are we looking at tonight? Of course, it is the Packers-Vikings review. We'll touch base on that suspended game from Monday night. We have our Packers Player of the Past. Guess what? It's our one-year anniversary coming up. And tonight, the finalists for the Pro Football Hall of Fame that list was put out. And we'll talk about, of course, the game against Detroit coming up. And we'll have our Packer history report as well. Before all of that, let's talk about the game. We'll take it in order. It was a lovely day in Green Bay. The weather was rather mild, and the temperatures were above freezing, which means that during tailgating, the once frozen grass parking lots started to thaw, and it was kind of the mud fest in the parking lot. You guys weren't there; you didn't see it. I should have taken some pictures because it got a little thick. Everybody got some dirty shoes, but it was a weird day, I think, in Green Bay. First of all, there was a lot of purple there. I'm not going to lie. There was a lot of purple. Jeff, you'll have to tell me if that came out over the TV because I did not watch the game. But a lot of purple there, but a good sized crowd for tailgating that came through, and just a lot of quiet optimism in Green Bay on Sunday. There was a spot at about 2:00 in the afternoon where the sun came out and it started to warm things up a little bit. Warm up, meaning that it stopped feeling like 30 degrees and felt like 38 degrees. But other than that, a good day in Green Bay as the game got underway. Both of you got to watch it on TV. What did you, Jeff? You had mixed company. It was this wasn't a mixed marriage; it was a mixed viewing.
It was indeed. We were at my friend of my wife's house. They had a great big TV, and lots of people were there New Year's Day. So there were, to my surprise, pleasant surprise, some Packer fans, Packer jerseys there. I went kind of incognito, but it was a very interesting watch with strangers. I didn't know these people very well. Some of them I knew, but some of them I didn't. And just kind of reactions and things like that. And I was quiet, kind of one of those inside cheering kind of things, because I didn't want to make an ass of myself. 1, 2, I didn't want to jinx the hell out of it because I didn't know how long we were staying, and I didn't want one of these people to come back later and be like, "Whoa!"
Jeff, I've got good news. Nobody was able to come back and do whoa.
I know we only stayed till halftime too. So, but it was.
There was still a considerable amount of trash talking you could have done at halftime because, as I noted to you, A, we weren't the Indianapolis Colts, and B, that game was not being played in Minnesota.
Those are both true statements, but I was just gonna keep it zipped. Like I said, I was cheering on the inside, and I just, what? It's been, out of the three of us, I've watched the most Vikings games this year. I've seen all kinds of, I know. But I've seen all kinds of weird things bounce in their favor. And so like I said, I was just like, this thing's not over until, the third quarter. Then it was pretty much over.
I know that's in the back of your mind, but that really, once the third quarter kind of hit, it really just didn't seem like their heart was in the game. And I know there was some suspicion out there amongst the Vikings faithful that they like to throw out there. They didn't need to worry about this game because they can still get the number 2 seed with a win next week in Chicago.
That was pretty incredible, actually. All of the gaslighting and excuses and things like that. So, bottom line, this has happened a few times this year to the Vikings. That whole negative point differential, as we've brought up a number of times. But no, I mean, it's kind of either feast or famine. They win the close games or they absolutely get their ass handed to them. And this was definitely the latter.
It didn't necessarily start out that way. It was a very Jekyll and Hyde first quarter. And I think that there were plenty of things that caused us consternation as Packers fans. Start out and we stopped them on a 3-out. Fabulous. Then we go 3 and out and have a blocked punt that damn near was returned for a touchdown. And I just can't tell you how disconcerting that was. I'm sure all of us listening, all of us here felt that. It's like, oh shit, this is going to go south really, really quickly in a way that we were all concerned about. But then, of course, we stopped them and held them to a field goal from the 1 yard line. I don't know how we held them to a field goal from the 1 yard line. Obviously, we had great play from our defensive line all game. We had stops from Smith, Reed, and Slayton on that drive that pushed them back. And then, of course, the Keyshawn Nixon kickoff return for a touchdown that completely changed the feel of the game. Not that it meant that we were actually feeling good yet at that point, but it certainly changed from something that could have been 7-0 early to something that was 7-3 in our favor instead of us being behind.
Well, the comment I recall was, the ass hats taketh away, the ass hats giveth as well.
Yeah, a couple of big things about that series, though. First, on the punt, a guy who, was brought into Green Bay specifically for his special teams play, Dallin Levitt, had the wherewithal, the heads up to go back and grab that ball. Now, I think there was a moment there where you could see him pause, and it looked like he was trying to decide, is he going to run? Is he going to pass? Can he kick it? What can he do with this ball once he has it? And unfortunately, he loses about 2 yards while trying to figure out what to do with it, and then realizes he doesn't want to go down in the end zone either. And he sacrificed himself at the 1 yard line. It probably could have been the 3 yard line had he just gone down right away. But that right there was the first big step of that. But then the second part is the defense on 3 big stops there. And you have to ask yourself, when was the last time you saw that defense making a huge goal line stop like that to walk away from something that potentially devastating to being just 3 points right there?
We've seen it, unfortunately, against us on our offense, right? When we've had it on the goal line and couldn't score. But no, that was impressive. And again, these are all these little things, right? Throughout the season, we've been conditioned to, oh Christ, here we go again. But this was one, oh, okay. And there was a bunch of those moments in this game, and they have been obviously on this latest winning streak.
But that, oh shit, it's going south again. I mean, that continues. So we stopped them 3 and out after Keyshawn Nixon's return. We get the ball back. We only go 7 yards in the next 5 plays. We did get our first down of the game finally on our third possession, although fair enough, Keyshawn Nixon's doesn't really count as not getting a first down. But we have 2nd and 1 and end up not converting on second, not converting on third. And then Rodgers is sacked for 15 yards on 4th down when we go for it. And it's like, oh shit, now they've got the ball. They take it, they score the touchdown, and they're going to take the lead. And thankfully they had Kirk Cousins on the other side. And, 4 plays later, it's a pick 6 Savage returning it for 75 yards. And we've got a 14-3 lead. And it was mostly good from there, but they certainly had their moments where even after that point, they looked like they could threaten, they could bring it back to game. But every time either their asshats made a mistake or alternatively, Kirk Cousins made a mistake.
That was certainly the case. Like I said, with the company we're watching, especially that pick 6, it was like, holy shit. And then there's the standard, okay, way to go, Cousins. It was fabulous to see. And again, that's where we got, our 3.5 quarters then of really good football. Again, the offense didn't, they didn't set any records. They didn't, start. It was not impressive offensively. They did exactly what they needed to do. But again, go back to very early this season, right? Defense. Oh my God, awful. Offense struggles. But now the defense is carrying the day. And I'm sure Rodgers or, anybody on that team is going to be like, that's cool. Defense, if we can get, anytime we can get 4 turnovers, our defense carry the day, we will take that.
I just want to emphasize how bad our offense was. So earlier during the 1 o'clock games, we were making fun of Justin Fields for having 7 completions and 7 sacks and having 1 yard per attempt on his passing plays. Well, with 4:25 left in the first quarter, Rodgers was 1 of 2 for 1 yards with that -16, meaning he was net -15. So he's -7.5 yards per passing play, 10 minutes, 11 minutes into the game. Cousins somehow was worse because Cousins was 1 of 9 for 8 yards, along with that pick 6. So his average was 0.9 per attempt, but the pick 6 obviously a little bit more significant. And we stopped Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook had 5 rushes for 4 yards at that point. And so our offense was certainly sputtering, but thankfully we were doing something that was worse than sputtering to that Minnesota offense. Continuing on. So we did on our next drive, we had a 14-play, 56-yard drive that got us the field goal that put us ahead 17-3. And that was really the starting point as far as moving the ball. And importantly on that drive, Rodgers to Lazard was converted 3 times for getting the first down. And unfortunately, we got first and goal with 6, didn't score a touchdown, but we were moving the ball by running and we were moving the ball for passing. And that drive took us from the first quarter to the second quarter. And so we could see signs that the offense was coming to life.
And the other thing to keep in mind is that we scored 41 unanswered points. Right? I mean, that was kind of going through and I was like, oh, that's right. They scored the first 3. We scored the next 41, and then they got a couple of garbage touchdowns at the end. They're still negative point differential, but nonetheless, we scored 41 points in a row on them. That's pretty damn impressive.
Neil, you mentioned that, we don't get our first down. Green Bay doesn't get their first down until their third offensive series. The other thing that's interesting about that is the offense gets the third touchdown of the game. Their first 2 touchdowns were not offensive touchdowns. It's not often that happens, whether it's 2 defensive touchdowns or whatever, but the third touchdown is the offensive touchdown, the first one for the offense. So that right there is incredible where they go up, 24-3. But then there's a really strange series of events near the end of the second quarter, just before going into halftime.
Minnesota gets the ball back, Amos interception. We get the ball, touchdown to Tunyon, 5 plays, 60 yards. Minnesota gets the ball back, 10 plays, 46 yards, missed a 50-yard field goal. And it was a 50-yard field goal because of a Holland sack that moved them way back from 2nd and 5 to 3rd and 14. So our defense, again, making that field goal longer. And then we made them pay for that missed field goal. We got the ball back with only 36 seconds, but we moved 23 yards in 4 plays. And Mason Crosby hits a 56-yard field goal that was the longest Packers field goal ever in Lambeau Field history. Mason Crosby breaking his 55-yard record, and he had broken that previously. It was his 54-yard record as well. But he set the new Packers record for longest field goal at Lambeau Field. We're up 27-3 at halftime.
But I couldn't believe that. I mean, you get the doink, you get the friendly bounce, obviously, which was huge, but
single doink though.
That's true. Yeah, not a double doink. But again, Chicago's the double doink. We'll just stick to the single doinks. But I mean, the longest field goal in Packers history is on January 1st, 2023. Think about over 100 years, right? I mean,
well, the longest field goal at Lambeau Field, but I don't think they were any longer than that. City Stadium, I don't think had any longer than that, right?
Probably not.
It was also the longest field goal at Lambeau Field in January period, which was previously a Vikings record from last year. So it's not the longest overall in Lambeau Field, but the longest in January at Lambeau Field and the longest Packers field goal at Lambeau Field.
And either way, it was a nice kick from Crosby for 56 yards, because I remember thinking the week prior, Minnesota winning their game in Minnesota in overtime with a 60-yard field goal. Now that was a 60-yard indoor field goal. And my comment after they won the game there was, don't expect to get that kick in Green Bay. It just wasn't going to happen.
I mean, it was remarkable just how flat Crosby's quick kick was. Obviously, he knows exactly what he needs to do to get it that distance. But you look at that, it's like it was never that far above the crossbar the entire distance of the kick. And, he knew exactly what he needed to do to get as far as he possibly could. We make it. With that kick, Mason Crosby went over 1,900 points in his career. He is one of only 12 players in NFL history to go over 1,900 points.
And he did it all with one team. So the team is looking solid. We're feeling good at halftime. Jeff, like you said, maybe at halftime you're leaving and you're wondering, does Minnesota do something crazy to pull out this game? But as I said, we're not the Colts, and that wasn't Minnesota. But the second half, the third quarter, Neil, really wasn't that impressive either way, was it?
No, we get the ball in the starting of the third quarter, and we go 5 plays, only 16 yards, and punt, including throwing a deep throw to Watson on a 3rd and 9 instead of getting that possession first down. But, we essentially gave up that advantage of getting the ball after halftime. Minnesota gets the ball. Sorry, they went 9 plays, 60 yards. They get into our territory, and then we have a Kenny Clark strip sack. The United of the strip sack, it's 27-10. Maybe Minnesota's got some hope, but Kenny Clark just did everything on that play.
I'll tell you, going up to that play, I was getting really upset watching it because it was that soft secondary. If you watch that series and they were letting these long passes go, the percentage of completion was way too high. And you could tell that the secondary was just playing back. And then, Kenny out of nowhere just not only comes through, but just swats that ball right out of Cousins' hands and falls on.
I just love that he went right for the ball, right from the bat. It's like, I'm not even going to tackle you. I'm going to whack that ball first and hope that I get it. So, and Cousins thankfully did not have the ball that
coming up and hitting that too. Man, that was
and then just fell right on it. Yep. Like I said, the
beautiful.
trifecta, the sack, technically the strip, and the recovery.
But Kenny Clark said, well, if my backs are going to play soft back there, I guess I better do something up front and take care of it. And he took care of it.
And then right after that, the Packers offense decided that they were going to take care of the game. Let's just pound that ball. 12 plays, 76 yards, 7 minutes and 12 seconds, ending with a 2-yard Dillon touchdown. The touchdown was the only play of the 4th quarter of that drive. Everything else, that was just finishing out the 3rd quarter, giving us a 34-3 lead. Then after that, Minnesota gets the ball back. What does Kirk Cousins do on the first play? He throws it to Rudy Ford for his 3rd interception of the game. And so, I mean, if Kirk Cousins is going to do that, we'll do whatever they want. And then we, of course, followed that up just by pounding the ball in and scoring the touchdown, finishing with a Rodgers touchdown run on an 8-play, 45-yard drive. But at this point, it's 41-3. And as far as I'm concerned, that's when the game ended. The Vikings aided their point differential. But when I looked at the numbers, I completely ignored everything after that garbage time because it was completely inconsequential. So let's look at some of those numbers. So Rodgers, 15-24, 159 yards, that sack. So only 143 net yards passing, but there were a bunch of key first down plays. So as far as first downs passing, 4 to Lazard, 1 to Tunyon, 1 to Cobb, Dobbs, Watson, all key first downs as far as keeping those long drives moving. And that's really been a theme of this team over the last month or so, is that we have had a number of 8, 10, 12, 14 play drives, and those long drives are sustained by being able to make those conversions when you need to make those conversions. And then as far as our running game was concerned, excluding the garbage time running again, between Jones and Dillon, 27 rushes, 156 yards, a 5.8 yard per attempt average, 2 touchdowns. So that running game was absolutely dominant. I know earlier in the game, we were all very frustrated that we kept throwing the ball when we weren't obviously so effective as far as running the ball. Obviously, we figured it out and did it when we needed to do it. Looking at the other side of the ball, Kirk Cousins was 18 of 31 with 2 of 5. But again, I'm going to ignore the garbage time throws. Kirk Cousins, excluding garbage time, 16 of 29, only 149 yards, no touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 2 sacks for 18 yards, a net 131 yards passing on 31 passing plays for Kirk Cousins. You look at what we did to Dalvin Cook. Cook had 9 rushes for 27 yards, a 3.0 yard per attempt average. We took care of Dalvin Cook. Actually, Kirk Cousins had more rushing yards than Dalvin Cook did. And then, of course, controlling Justin Jefferson famously with only 1 reception for 15 yards, and Thielen also 1 reception for 16 yards. Our defense did all of the things in that non-garbage time portion of the game that we needed to do. And that's reflected if you look at yards in the non-garbage time, 300 to 208. Obviously, turnovers 4-0, including that strip sack. Time of possession, 30 minutes to 20 minutes between the two teams. We were by far the better team, except when you excluded that garbage time. Now, I do want to say one thing about garbage time. Cousins had a touchdown in garbage time, but I want to give a special shout out to Nick Mullins, because in garbage time on that last touchdown drive, he was 4 of 4, 57 yards with the touchdown. He had a QBR of 100.0, that he was perfect by QBR, and a quarterback rating of 158.3. He had garbage time perfection, and nothing really epitomizes the Minnesota Vikings more than garbage time perfection.
Okay, start the QB controversy.
Yes. I noticed you didn't throw Jordan Love's numbers out there, Neil. How was his garbage time?
2 of 3, 9 yards. We clearly weren't trying to do very
Right.
much. So, there was
Run the
nothing
ball
really.
at that
Yeah,
point.
exactly.
Just hand it off.
The other thing about Kirk Cousins is he completed more passes to Packers defenders than he did to Jefferson and Thielen combined. We also remember last week after that Miami game, we asked, boy, when was the last time the Packer defense had 3 interceptions in a game, let alone 3 and a quarter? And now this week we're asking, hey, when was the last time the Packers defense had 3 interceptions in a game? Gee, it's only been 7 days.
Yeah.
So that's been, this defense in the last couple of games is really, it's becoming that defense we expected back in September. That September defense that just really disappointed us, especially in those October games as well. We really, really questioned what was going on. Everybody in town was ready to hang Joe Barry and ride him out of town on rails, put him on a slow boat to China, whatever euphemism, cliche you want to use there. But something has come alive. Something has clicked. They have come together and they are doing everything that they need to do, specifically not only to keep the Packers in the game, but really to win the game as well.
Well, and to dominate on defense. That's
Yeah.
the thing. I mean, they're getting all of these turnovers. And so the offense doesn't have to work very hard. They just sustain. Hand the ball off, like Neil pointed out. Get the first downs, third down passing. They're not getting, at least in this game, there weren't huge offensive plays. They just ground down. But again, when you get spotted a special teams touchdown, you get spotted a defensive pick 6, the game is yours to lose. And they haven't been doing that. Adjustments have been made, but just over the turnovers, it's just absolutely amazing. Just like the embarrassment of riches, if you will, on the defense, which is fantastic. Like I said, and it all plays together, right? The turnover, the fortuitous turnovers, keeping the other team from scoring, but then also just field position, just all kinds of turnarounds. So again, it's a long season. It's a really long season. If we would have been doing this stuff, week 4, we'd have been like, oh, we're going to the Super Bowl. It's
right,
done.
But now imagine the season were the opposite. We were doing all this at the beginning, and now the defense had gone to shit here. That would be
so you're saying, imagine if we were the Arizona Cardinals, for
right.
example.
Overall, these defensive numbers are nice, but I'm not going to lie, they still frustrate me. I told you that series there still frustrated me, and I'm sure they will coming up this weekend again.
But going back to these takeaway numbers, we are now tied for 6th in the NFL in takeaways when we were right at the bottom through, the Jets game at least. We are tied for 6th.
Half the season, yeah.
We have had 12 takeaways in the last 4 games, and those 12 takeaways have led to 44 points off of the turnovers. That makes a big difference as far as winning and losing football games, very obviously.
Well, and since week 7, I think on the Packer dope sheet, I think they've scored 79 points off of turnovers, which is like 5th or 6th in the league. That's since week 7, because there were none weeks 1 through 6. There was not 1 point scored off of turnovers. So it's just like, talk about, peaking at the right time, second half team, whatever you want to call it, to have a couple more victories. But you know what?
Well, with that said, this weekend, we talked about it last week, all of the things that we needed to fall in place to have the shot at the playoffs. And everything except for the Jets beating the Seahawks worked out for us exactly as we wanted it to. Seattle at 8-8, Green Bay at 8-8, Detroit at 8-8. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as we look at the last week of the season here. But the weekend itself ended up kind of strangely because we're not quite sure where we are. Our Monday night game got suspended. This is a game that, for us anyway, between 2 teams that we really enjoyed road trips to the last 2 years, Buffalo and Cincinnati. And we really enjoyed both cities, both fan bases. And these are 2 really good football teams that were ready. That Monday night game should have been a spectacular showdown. And we are now just waiting. We at this moment still do not know the fate of that game.
But the game doesn't matter based on what happened on the field, right? That was obviously just horrible. None of us were around the last time something of this magnitude happened in an NFL game. And I just can't imagine what it's like to be his family, his teammates, the players on the other side of the field. And thankfully they had the good sense to say, no, we are not taking 5 minutes to warm up. We are stopping this game now.
I have a hard time believing that the NFL doesn't have a contingency plan for this. I think that all the major sports leagues should. If they don't, I know for sure the NFL has a contingency plan if, say, God forbid, a team plane crashes, and they have a number on it. Like it's a death and dismemberment of less than or greater than 15 players, what they would do for that team. And that is a written policy. You can actually get a copy of that policy from the NFL. If you ask for it, they'll fax it to you. But things like a death on the field, maybe a terrorist attack, maybe a blimp floating into the stadium, anything like that, because there's got to be weather contingencies and things like that. I have a hard time believing that between football, baseball, basketball, hockey, and even soccer, Neil, that there's got to be some type of plan in place. What do you do in a near-death experience like this? Even more recently, you alluded to Chuck Hughes in 1971, but even more recently, Darryl Stingley, even though that was a preseason game, when he was carted off the field paralyzed, they still finished that preseason game. And John Madden was the only person really to go to the hospital after the game. He was the Raiders coach, not the Patriots coach. He went to the hospital, and it was just flabbergasted that none of the Patriots went to the hospital there, and he got the team play. He got in contact with the team plane before they got out of town. But I don't want to speculate what the policy should be, but there are people within that league office who get paid a lot of money to decide what the policy should be, and it's got to be put in place before it happens again. Bottom line, with the Monday night game, we feel the league did the right thing. What they do from here, we're not going to speculate on. We'll hold tight just like everybody else does, and kind of go with it as it happens. With that said, we're going to move on with our show here and our Packer player of the past. Not just a player, but a very specific play in general, Neil. Who is it? When is it? And you are just giggling way too much about it.
Yes, this week's Packer player of the past is sort of like a ghost of Christmas past that's also a ghost of Christmas present and hopefully a ghost of Christmas future. And that specifically is Randall Cobb, and I'm going to focus on the 2013 play-in game for making the playoffs in the 2013 season. So just a very quick background on Randall Cobb. As we know, he went to the University of Kentucky for 3 years, joined the Packers as a second-round pick in the 2011 draft. And in his very first game for the Packers, he both had a receiving touchdown and he had a 108-yard kickoff return for a touchdown, then tying the NFL record for the length of a kickoff return. 2011 had a typical type of rookie year for receiver. 2012, he starts to make some advances, has 8 touchdowns as a receiver. The 2013 season, however, was a season that was monumental for the Packers due to injuries. And so Randall Cobb himself, in the 6th game of the season, went down with a broken fibula. So broken fibula, he'd only played 6 games as far as the year is concerned, and he's out. They put him on injured reserve, and there's the hope that maybe he'll be recovered enough to come back. And then further, on November 4th against the Bears, Aaron Rodgers went down injured on a sack by Shea McClellan. It was an injury to his left non-throwing shoulder, but that threw our season into a bit of a tailspin. So prior to that game against the Bears, the Packers were 5-2. Rodgers was injured very early in that game against the Bears at Lambeau. We ended up losing that game 27-20 with Seneca Wallace as quarterback. We overall went 2-5-1 with backups, including 2 losses with Seneca Wallace, 0-1-1 with Scott Tolzien, and then Matt Flynn sort of stabilized a little with a 2-2 season. But we went from 5-2 until 5-6-1 before winning at Atlanta and Dallas with Matt Flynn. So entering the final game of the season, we are 7-7-1. We are facing the Bears, who are 8-7. This is a situation where the NFC North was not so good that year. And so the winner of this game was going to make the NFC playoffs as the winner from the North. The loser was going home. The 10-6 Arizona Cardinals were the 3rd wild card. There was no 3rd wild card then. So the loser was completely out of the playoffs. So this is December 29th, 2013. And it is Aaron Rodgers' first game back from injury, and it is Randall Cobb's first game back from injury. We've got a classic matchup of Aaron Rodgers versus Jay Cutler. And so in the first half of that game, it was very much a back and forth game, and Aaron Rodgers was decidedly not sharp in the first half of that game. He had 2 interceptions in the first half. We had a really fluky touchdown for a first touchdown in which Julius Peppers sacked Rodgers, and the ball went forward as if it looked like it was an incomplete pass. So everyone just sort of stood around waiting for the ball until Boykin picked it up and eventually ran in for the touchdown when everyone thought that the play was dead, other than the announcers, seemingly. So we had a fluky first touchdown. We were not great as far as the first half is concerned, but we at least contained the damage on the Bears offense, or maybe the Bears offense contained it. But, Matt Forte had a good game. Jay Cutler globally had a good game too. His only interception was on a Hail Mary at the end of the game. So good games by the Bears offense. Second half comes along and we are starting to get the ball moving. So the Bears were ahead 14-13. Aaron Rodgers throws a touchdown pass to Randall Cobb, makes it a 2014 Packers lead in the game. So we took the lead in the third quarter. Unfortunately, we could take the lead, but we could not hold the lead. And by the late in the fourth quarter, the Bears were ahead 28-20 when Eddie Lacy scored a touchdown. And inexplicably, we did not go for the 2-point conversion that would have tied it at 28. It was 28-27. Now, we had not made a successful 2-point conversion all year, but it still seems somewhat inexplicable to not go for the tie with 11 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Eventually, we get the ball back with plenty of time, and we've got the chance for one final drive in order to make up that 1-point deficit. We were down 28-27, and we moved the ball a little bit. Then we got to midfield and we were stalled. And specifically, we were stalled on third down. We had an incomplete pass that would have gotten us into field goal range that could have tied it. But you can see from the panel, we're down 28-27, 45 seconds to go, and it is 4th and 8. And let us see if we can get the video to work for that play.
Blitz. Rodgers gets out. Floats it. Cobb. Touchdown. Randall Cobb. His second of the game.
That Jay Cutler is awesome.
You see
Look
he's
at
jumping.
Cutler's
He
face.
settles right at the first down marker, and Randall Cobb goes right by him. John Kuhn does coming over to help get enough, just enough of Julius Peppers off the edge, and Aaron Rodgers then able to buy a little bit of time.
So what an incredible play, right? We've got a 4th and 8 situation. We're desperate. Time is running out, and Aaron Rodgers sneaks away from Julius Peppers thanks to a block from John Kuhn, throws it downfield to a wide open Randall Cobb, scores the touchdown. We take the lead 33-28. That ended up being the final score. The Packers made the playoffs that year with an 8-7-1 record, avenging that 1978 Packers team that missed the playoffs, tied with the Vikings with an 8-7-1 record. So it's part of the legacy of Randall Cobb torturing Bears fans and torturing the Bears. And certainly a glorious game. And specifically thinking in terms of play-in games, just as we have this week, this is another glorious opportunity to make new Packers memories. And hopefully Randall Cobb is contributing as far as that's concerned. Couple of other thoughts on Randall Cobb. So in that 2013 season, as I said, he was injured most of the year. He only had 4 touchdowns on the year, 2 of those touchdowns in that game against the Bears. In fact, he only had 2 receptions in that game, 2 receptions, 2 touchdowns. That's about a perfect game as far as coming back is concerned. The next year was his breakout season in which he had 12 touchdowns. He had 71 catches for first down in that 2014 season among 91 catches total. And I think that's really one of the things that is why Aaron Rodgers wanted Randall Cobb back. He's very much a possession receiver. He's somebody who is able to move those chains. And just looking at Randall Cobb's overall statistics for the Packers, both regular season and postseason, he has 577 receptions for the Packers. 344 of those receptions are for a first down. And specifically this year, 32 receptions, 19 of those receptions for a first down. You need a first down, send it to Randall Cobb.
Of all the legendary names that you threw out just involved in that one play, Neil, one of them, Julius Peppers, is a guy you might be thinking, hey, when did he retire? Is he ready for the Pro Football Hall of Fame? He is not eligible until next year. And we mentioned that because the Pro Football Hall of Fame finalists for this year, the list has come out. Of the 15 players on that list, the one we want to throw out there, Joe Thomas, former Wisconsin Badger, offensive lineman for 11 seasons with the Cleveland Browns, is on that list. I firmly believe that Joe is going to get in. I think that if Joe had the exact same career playing for the Jets or the Giants, that gold jacket would have been fitted for him the day he retired. So I look forward to seeing Joe Thomas, former Badger, but also on the senior list, a guy that we talked about with our friend Bengal Jim, Ken Riley, Jeff the Rattler. You even have his card at the ready there. But Ken Riley, finally a senior nominee for the Cincinnati Bengals, and probably a player because the Bengals have only one Hall of Famer in Anthony Munoz, and it'd be probably nice to see Ken Anderson in there. But Ken Riley deservedly is on that senior list, and I think we're maybe kind of secretly hoping that he gets the nod as well. But there were a couple other, what were the other names, Neil, that you had on the senior list? Don Coryell and Chuck Howley, and there was one other one.
Joe
Klecko.
Yeah,
Joe Klecko. Yeah, all right. Yeah, and Chuck Howley was the answer to our trivia question. Who's the only Super Bowl MVP from a losing team? Chuck Howley in Super Bowl V, right? So there's Ken Riley of the Cincinnati Bengals. And speaking of the Cincinnati Bengals, that's kind of how this all started. In October of 21, I was lucky enough to get asked through the diehard Packer fan group to be the resident Packer fan, to sit in on a webcast for a guy named Bengal Jim, who has a terrific webcast for the Cincinnati Bengals, puts on a terrific tailgate right outside along the Ohio River there for Bengals home games. We went to that Cincinnati game, but it was a concept there that was born of that Neil said, hey, why don't we do a podcast? To which I said, okay, let's have another beer and let's enjoy the weekend and we'll talk about it later. And it kind of came back around again when the last season ended, because the team was doing so well and we had such high hopes for the Packers last season. And it was 1 year ago this week, it'll be a year ago, January 7th is the date that we aired our first GBC podcast. And we've been having fun. It has grown, you guys. It's been a great year that we've been doing this. Neil has become a phenomenal editor, video editor, sound editor. He learned all this on his own. And Jeff, you become quite the historian, looking things up, getting us great bedtime stories every week. And it's just been a lot of fun with the guests that we've had. And big thanks to our viewers, our listeners, our followers, with all the fans that we've interacted with all the guests that we've had on the show, with the two places we've gone so far between Cincinnati and Buffalo. We garnered a fan in all places out of the Buffalo Bills Mafia. Emily's dad, Dan Macaroni, loyal Bills fan and loyal listener. And we are thankful that you're joining us, that you're tuned in, as well as everybody who has tuned in. But on TikTok, the Wedge of Allegiance that I posted from this past weekend shot up the charts with over 400 likes now. It has surpassed Move Those Chains in likes, but Move Those Chains, Neil, 11,400 views on that alone. So our social media, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, we're just having fun with this. This has been a great year, and I think we've learned a lot about how this process works and how to put together some good content.
And thank you for all of you who are listening to us every week.
So we take our social media with us, especially when we do the tailgating. I'm going to talk to Scott. I want to make us the official podcast of the Lot 9 Tailgate. Joey T does a great job with diehard Packer fans. He's got his own show, but we put up content, as you can see now, from the Lot 9 Tailgate Party. We do things up at Lambeau Field real nicely, and we'll do it again this Sunday as the Detroit Lions come into town. It is a Sunday night matchup. Originally billed as game number 272. It may be only 271, but it could be the game, or should be the game, to finish the season. But as predicted on this program, the Green Bay Packers and the Detroit Lions at 8-8 are playing in prime time for the final NFC playoff spot. What do you guys like about this game coming in Sunday night?
Well, first of all, John, don't sprain your elbow too much, patting yourself on the back. But yes, you did call this about a month ago.
December 11th, yes.
Well done. Well played.
Thank you, Jeff.
You know, the Packers have owned Detroit in Wisconsin, since 1992. I mean, they've just completely dominated. Hopefully that will continue. Obviously, there's a lot more at stake now with the game being late. Detroit's gonna know if they have anything to play for or not. So if Seattle wins, Detroit's kind of hosed, right? They've got really nothing to play for. That's fine. We've got lots to play for. I'm looking forward to a dominating win. Packers are peaking. It's a home game. It's January. There's going to be lots of crazy folks doing lots of crazy things pre-game. It's the national game. It's going to finish up the season. Couldn't be more happy and excited to close this thing out, because, man, 6 weeks ago, or 7-8 weeks ago, things were not looking pretty. So very optimistic. Hopefully the Packers can close the deal and get into the playoffs. And that's a lot of discussion for another time. But let's get past Detroit with a dominating win.
So let's just start out as far as the tailgating is concerned, right? When it's a 7:20 game at Lambeau, you know that crowd is going to be pumped up. It is going to be plenty of alcohol consumption in the many hours leading up to the game. Maybe not at Buffalo levels, but the Packers fans are certainly expected to bring it. And the question is, what are we going to face on the other side of the stadium? And so, we've had a very poor start and then finished well, but so is Detroit. Detroit actually started out the year 1-6. And when we played Detroit in week 9, that was the start of it for them. Since the Packers game and including that game, Detroit is 7-2, and they have beaten a lot of decent teams. They've beaten teams that we lost to specifically. They haven't really had a killer game over anyone, but they've been a very good team since we played them last time. Now, that last game was sort of an ugly game all the way around, right? It's a 15-9 game, 3 interceptions for Rodgers. Our rushers, Dillon and Jones only had 59 yards total. We actually outgained them 389 to 254 in that first game. It's just shocking, but that tells you, where the turnovers were. We're 0-4 in the red zone. So we did not have a good game, and that was certainly within our tailspin. But if we look at the overall numbers between the Packers and the Lions, by DVOA, we're 12th, they're 9th. Offense, we're 11th, they're 6th. Defense, we're 18th. They are 28th, and that is our opportunity. Special teams, we are up to 17th after being at 30th 3 weeks ago. We are 17th DVO special teams. Now, if you look at the Packers and the Lions since that week 9 game, the Packers are 5-2 over that period, and they're number 9 in the league in DVOA. The Lions are 6-2. And they're number 4 in DVOA, number 2 in points, number 3 in point differential. This is a much better team than the team that we played back earlier in the season. I also want to contrast that with the Minnesota Vikings, who are now 28th in DVOA, and their negative 14.2% is the 7th worst ever among all playoff teams since 1981 when these numbers are held. Statement by Aaron Schatz is that they're the greatest Pythagorean overachievers in NFL history. I think that's a perfect statement on the Vikings. Yeah, we are not playing the Vikings this week. We are playing the Lions. Just a little bit more looking into the numbers for the Packers and the Lions. The Lions actually have the number 3 offense by yards in the NFL, the number 6 passing, number 11 rushing, number 4 in points. Their offense is good, and it's not something that we should take lightly. The last Jared Goff interception was by Jair way back in week 9. Jared Goff has been holding on to the ball. Our opportunities, especially, however, are on the defense. Their defense is overall 32nd in yards per game. They've allowed 399 yards per game, 30th in pass defense, 29th in rush defense, 29th in points. So this is a team that, as we saw earlier in the season, it was a lot of high-scoring games and they were losing. Now it's high-scoring games that they're winning. We've got to have ourselves ready. But again, as we've done over the last 4 games in the winning streak, I think we can expect that we're going to get a little bit more out of our defense as far as turnovers, maybe get Jared Goff that first turnover since he had back against the Packers in week 9.
On the other piece to keep in mind here is you've got a dome team coming to Lambeau in January. Now, we're not getting the traditional cold weather. Like it's going to, what, John, you said,
right now projected daytime high on Sunday is 30 degrees. So kickoff is after sunset. It'll drop a little bit. It'll probably be in the mid to high 20s. No precipitation expected for Sunday, however.
But still, you've got a dome team outside in January. Advantage Packers. That just period. It's going to be cold. The ball might be slick. There's going to be things that, that they're not going to anticipate that are going to be to our advantage.
On the other hand, they still have Jamal Williams as their top running back, and he is 10th in the NFL in rushing yards, first in rushing touchdowns with 15 touchdowns. I don't think Jamal Williams is going to have a problem with the cold in Lambeau in January.
One of the other things, Jeff, that you mentioned, I'll agree with you on the surface that if Seattle wins, that Detroit knows they won't have anything to play for. But I think their coach, I think Dan Campbell, is a great motivator. There is no way Detroit goes into this game saying, hey, let's do Green Bay a favor. They are going to play to win the game. They're going to play to chew the kneecaps. They're going to play to end their season on a high note. And they really, from where they were in the 21 season to where they're ending this season, I think they've got a lot to look forward to going ahead on that team, looking at what they've got lined up for draft picks, what they've got lined up for salary cap room, kind of same with the Bears as well. But I think they want to end on a high note no matter what happens in the earlier games.
I will note that I actually predicted the Lions were going to have a pretty good year this year back in our season preview.
You did, Neil.
And I like Dan Campbell a lot as a coach. I am actually afraid of him as an opposing coach in the game. I want to note one other thing as far as these teams are concerned. They're both really good as far as special teams are concerned. As far as kickoff returns, the Lions are third in the NFL. The Packers are fourth in the NFL. We're fourth. As far as yards per return. But interestingly, we are actually first in the total number of kickoffs returned. That is that fearless nature of Keyshawn Nixon and taking it out from the end zone. That has us with the most kickoff returns. And we're also first in the NFL in total kickoff return yards at 1126. So, we've got things as far as our returns are concerned that we know. I mean, obviously, this is what Jeff's going to talk about in the final segment, but specifically looking at Keyshawn Nixon, he's averaged 30.0 yards per kickoff return. That is the highest in franchise history. It's the 8th highest overall in the NFL since 2010, when they went to the kickoff touchback being taken out to the 25-yard line.
Neil, I know you didn't agree necessarily with the Packers getting the primetime game. Looking at it, maybe that game should be played at the same time as the Seattle game. I'll let you say your piece, but the only counter argument to that I can have is that Green Bay is a draw. You know what I mean? Primetime draw, putting the last game of the season, Sunday night football. I think that's what the league is looking for. This is a ratings winner lined up for Sunday night.
It's a ratings winner, but it's a competitive list loser, and it is making other teams' fan bases think that this is going to be rigged for the Packers. It's rigged for Aaron Rodgers, and I really don't have a counter argument for that. I'd like to point out what they do in the English Premier League on the last day of the season. So in the English Premier League, the top 4 teams go to the Champions League. The lowest 3 are relegated. The winner obviously is determined just by win-loss record in the Premier League. And so they have all 10 of those games played at the exact same time, purely for a competitive fairness perspective. That is, you don't get an advantage from knowing what the results of the other games are. You've got to go and play your game, and you've got to play it all out no matter what. You can't choose to rest your players or anything along those lines. And that's what the NFL should have done. I agree, playing the Packers on Sunday Night Football is great. They should have had 2 games simultaneous on Sunday Night Football. They should have had the Rams and the Seahawks played at the same time. And if you've got to pay a little bit money to one network or the other in order to get this to work, who cares? It is what is right as far as competitiveness and fairness is concerned.
Now, the assumption here, and we need to do our part to actually win the friggin' game, right?
No matter what, you got to win the game. Doesn't matter
Exactly.
when you're playing, right?
Right.
Green Bay has the easiest road right now. Win and you're in.
Right. But my point is that for all the conspiracy theories and everything else about, Packers getting in, they still have to win the game. And like you said, Dan Campbell has done really, really well with the Detroit franchise in instilling how to win. However, I think because the Packers been there, done that, right? They've played playoff games. Many players on this team have played in playoff games, big games. So I think they they get it. They've been there. They understand it. Detroit still dangerous, but I still think that in a big game such as this, they just don't have the experience. Next year they could be super scary, but I still think the advantage goes to the Packers based on experience. Obviously, they're at home. If this is in Detroit, okay. But still, let's conspiracy theories be damned. Let's the Packers win. Rodgers gets in the playoffs. The Packers get, the NFL gets what they want or whatever you want to say about it. But then the Packers are the number 7 seed. And then that's a whole different conversation as well.
We'll talk about that next week, Jeff. Are you going reverse psychology? Are you expecting the Packers to lose this game?
No, not at all. Like I said before, I mean, they've with experience but they have to uphold the bargain for all the conspiracy theorists. They have to win the game first. Then, let's sort that out later.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's crap by the NFL. I just want to say one other thing about Detroit. I did note that they are 7-2 in their last 9 games, but it has not been world beaters that they've had. Their 2 losses were to Buffalo, close. They got beaten badly by the Panthers. Their wins are the Bears twice, the Giants, the Jags, Minnesota, the Jets, and Green Bay. So, this is not that they've beaten the best teams in the NFL. And yes, this is going to be a stern test no matter what the situation is. But this is a team that, as you said, Jeff, they don't have the same level of experience as our players do. And I think that experience and the game being in Lambeau are going to be the difference makers.
And Neil, speaking of being at Lambeau, you're making your way to Green Bay. You're going to be in the stadium. You'll be in the house. We'll be doing some tailgating on Sunday. So we are looking for a fantastic finish to this NFL season Sunday night with the Detroit Lions coming into Green Bay. So as we get ready for this next game, the last regular season game, we'll kind of take a peek back at the Vikings game as well, tie them together with our bedtime story. Jeff, what do you have for us?
Kickoff returns. Now, this is kind of a esoteric topic, not something that happens every game, certainly, but
no, it does. It does happen every game. There are kickoff returns in every game, Jeff. Every single game has a kickoff return.
You're not wrong. So kickoff returns for touchdowns. Thank you, Neil. Kickoff returns for touchdowns. The Green Bay Packers. So with a fantastic Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel article and some other research that I've done, since 1940, this fantastic franchise has returned, including against the Vikings, 31 kickoff returns for touchdowns since 1940. So they've come in many shapes and sizes, many different players. I went and I wrote them all down. I'm not going to read them all off to you, but I will kind of, there's some interesting patterns, some interesting notes that I just want to talk about here. We've already mentioned one is the Randall Cobb, 108-yard kickoff return for a touchdown back on September 8th, 2011. And he did hold the record for the longest until it was broken a few years later at Lambeau Field, but it was not the Packers that returned. It was 109 yards for reference. So there's only actually been in the 2000s, since January 2nd of 2000, when Basil Mitchell returned against Carolina, returned a kickoff return for a touchdown, 88 yards, including that one. Nixon's touchdown the other day was just the 4th in 23 years. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty crazy. However, and so they seem to come in spurts, so to speak. There were a lot during the 90s, actually. Roll Preston, so he had 2 in 1998 within about a month. But one note on that one, so one kickoff return for a touchdown was against the Lions on September 6th of 1998. What's kind of special about that is the prior play, the Lions had a kickoff return for a touchdown. And so that was a 101-yard return. And so that was the first time a back-to-back returns had happened in over a decade. So at that point, on January 26, 1997, Desmond Howard.
Yep.
Yeah, we know how that one turned out. That turned out okay. The kickoff return for a touchdown against New England. Names: Don Beebe, Robert Brooks, Darrell Thompson, Del Rogers. So one of the premier Packer kickoff returners from the 70s and just overall, one Steve Odom. He is still the franchise leader in career kickoff return yardage with 4,124. So he primarily was during the 70s. So we've got Turdell Middleton. We've got Dave Hampton. He was fantastic. Travis Williams. But the real premier Packer returner was, in fact, Travis Williams. He returned 2 touchdown kickoff returns for touchdowns in the same game.
Wow.
Back on November 12th of 1967. And at that time, he was the first player to return 2 kicks, and it was in the same quarter, actually. So how about that? So it was against Cleveland, 87 and 85 yards. Travis Williams, he doesn't hold the Packer record or the franchise record for the most kickoff return yards, but he was prolific. He had many kickoff returns, but he still shares a record for kickoff returns in a season. He had 4 in 1967 And an interesting stat, this is kind of how you slice it and dice it. So it's an NFL record. It was only 18 kickoff returns in 1967, but his average on those 18 kickoff returns was 41.1 yards. So that is an NFL record. Again, small sample size, 18 kickoff returns. But Herb Adderley, Al Carmichael, interesting, in 1956, October 7th, Al Carmichael had a 106-yard kickoff return against the Bears. It was the longest kickoff return that stood until 2007. So we've got all these prolific players, all these memories. So really what it boils down to is when a kickoff return happens for the Packers, kickoff return for a touchdown, what's their record? Packers are 21-10 when they return a kickoff for a touchdown. Spoiler alert, they've returned, obviously, the more teams you play, the more often you play them, the more chances you have to return a kickoff for a touchdown. But I'm liking it. There's a number of teams where Packers have returned, 2, 3. Vikings, the record or the most number of kickoff returns for a touchdown against a team is 1 Detroit Lions.
Nice.
Packers have done it 4 times, most recently against the Lions. Actually, it was a win in 1998 on September 6th, 1 Roel Preston. So again, that was that back-to-back that I talked about earlier. They do return kickoffs for touchdowns against the Lions, 4 of them. I'd like to see another one. Keyshawn Nixon, keep up the good work, the record-setting pace he's on. And so that's your bedtime story. Kickoff returns for a touchdown don't happen very often, but when they do, it usually swings the game, and the Packers are very successful when they do.
The other anomaly from that Week 17 matchup with the Vikings, not only did the Packers get a kick return for a touchdown, but there was the pick six, an interception return for a touchdown. The last time that happened, I believe, was one of those 1967 games where Travis Williams had the kick return. And I think the other stat that we saw was that it's the only time that it was a more than a 100-yard kick return and a 75-yard or more interception return in the long storied history of the NFL. So that was a huge game against Minnesota. So we are hoping for a even huger game this week against the Detroit Lions. Or Neil, that's a real word, isn't it? Huger.
Of course it is. Any word that you make up is a good word. So,
all right. With that, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
We need to take care of business against Detroit. It's a game in January. The way to take care of a game in January at Lambeau Field is to run the ball. We've been blessed with a very good rushing tandem, and this tandem is so good that if you consider Packers running back tandems that have gone over 650 yards and over 5 touchdowns from scrimmage for both running backs, that's happened 5 times in Packers history. Paul Hornung and Jim Taylor did it in 1960. Taylor and Tom Moore in 63, John Brockington and Donnie Anderson in 71, Dylan and Jones last year, Dylan and Jones this year. 650 yards rushing for each of them, greater than 5 touchdowns. Let's see some more yards. Let's see some more touchdowns. Let's pound that ball and beat Detroit.
Neil, travel safely, first of all, and enjoy your trip to Lambeau. I know we will be in contact over these next few days leading up to the game. I will be watching the game like everyone else, or most other people, Sunday night. I'm excited that the NFL has elected to make this the national game, the last game, presumably at this point, last game of the season. I think it's fitting. I think it'll be fun. Again, Packers do need to take care of business, and this will set, if provided they do, will set the table for a very exciting postseason.
And Neil, with all of those rushing numbers, the one thing we didn't gush about this week is Aaron Jones going over 1,000 yards. So we'll put a pin in that and circle back to it next week when we do our season wrap up. All right. Thanks again to all of our fans, listeners, everybody viewing. It's been a great year. We look forward to keep doing the GBC podcast. If you're watching us on YouTube, certainly hit subscribe. It's free. It gives you notification when new episodes are uploaded. You can always leave a comment on YouTube for us as well. You can also try to reach out to us on Twitter. Our DMs are open there as well. You can find the GBC Podcast at GreenBayChat. That's all one word. We are on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat. Please give us a follow, as well as on Facebook at the GBC Podcast Green Bay Chat. And may you fully appreciate the magnitude of your impending good fortune. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Good night.